Our drawer backing is going to fit into these dados that we created. Those dados are a 1/2 inch of material, then a 1/4 inch dado. And so our backing is going to slide in. It's going to stop down here at the bottom. It's not going to go all the way to the floor. That way when we drag it across the floor, moving it, we don't have this 1/4 inch piece kind of flapping and vibrating around. So that groove should be on the bottom and both sides of the cabinet. Now to get an accurate measurement, we're going to measure kind of like we did for the drawer. We're going to measure from dado groove to dado groove. We can visually see that. So I can take my tape measure. It's about the same as this. So I'm going to go 11 1/4 that way. And this way I'm going to hold my tape measure about halfway on that piece of plywood, and I am going to hold it down here. So I'm going to say 23 13/16, 23 13/16 that way, and 11 1/4 that way. So let's go cut our piece of 1/4 inch plywood for the backing. I'm going to have to cut off a sheet of plywood here. We're going to use this far fence to set to 23 13/16. Now we're going to cut a little off to get rid of the factory edge. And now all we have to do is butt it up against there and we'll have a 23 inch strip. All right, with this wider board, I'm going to use a sliding table saw again. Now I'm going to change that fence to 11 1/4, and the piece that falls off in between here is going to be my good piece. If you have a smaller piece of plywood that needs to be cut, then you'll do that at the regular table saw, because we just need to trim a little bit off of this one. Before we install this backing, we're going to come in, we're going to take this over to our sanding table. We're going to clean up any marks or inside things that we need to get off, because once this back goes in, then our only access is from the front of the cabinet, and it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to sand inside. So we're going to take this over there and do our sanding. So this has saved us some time later on trying to sand inside. Once that back is in, we're going to have an inside corner. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to sand. So now we're going to slide that back in, that we've cleaned that up a little bit. We don't have to worry about the top up here where the drawer is going to be, because the drawer is going to cover that. If there's stuff up there, boogers, glue spots, Don't need to worry about that because you won't ever see that. So let's go put the back in. All right, so we're going to take our back piece, and before we put this in, we're going to sand this as well. Now that we have this sanded, we can slide it in. What we're looking for is the better side. So right here, there's kind of a crack in the veneer. If you're gonna put that towards the inside, put that up where the drawer is. If you're gonna put it towards the outside, then that doesn't really matter. I think I'm gonna actually put that, since it's nice down here, I'm gonna put this towards the inside with this crack up towards the drawer back. That way we have a nice outside look as well. If it gets a little tight on you, you can use a mallet to just tap it in. Might have got a little glue in the channel down there, the dado. Once it's in all the way, we're going to take a piece or a screw, and you can put 1 or 2 screws in just to keep this from vibrating around. Really, the top is going to keep it from sliding out once we put the top on. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple screws into that plywood cleat that's on top. Now we're ready for the top to be installed. All right, we're going to take the clamps off of the door and top that we have glued up. So we're going to just loosen the clamps and put them back in the clamp rack when we're done. This black mark here, this is where the metal clamp was touching the wood where the glue was, and for some reason there's a chemical reaction. It causes it to turn black, but we're going to be sanding all that off anyways. Now we need to get all this excess glue off of this workpiece. So we're going to go over and we're going to take the scraper and scrape off all this glue on both sides. All right, so we're here with the scraper. We're going to scrape this off. The reason we need to get rid of all this excess glue is it can damage our machines. We're going to send this through the wide belt sander and get this cleaned up. And this glue, if it's left on there, will heat up with the friction of the sander and will transfer to the sandpaper. So we want to get off all the excess that we can. Take our scraper and just scrape off the excess. And now we're going to take these two to the wide belt sander and get them cleaned up. Our first process with the wide belt sander is going to be measuring the thickness. So we're going to get the dial caliper and we're going to measure the offset joint. If we have any joints that are offset from each other at all, we want to try to measure the widest point. So make sure it's zeroed out and then pull out your calipers and do your measuring. So I'm getting about 0.96. So I'm going to set the machine to that and we're going to run it through. So I'm going to get the machine set, 0.96. And we're going to turn it on and we're going to turn the dust system on. So this piece got stuck in the sander and slowed down, and it actually created a dip right in here. I don't know if you can see that very well on the video, but there's actually a little dip that we'll need to continue to sand out until that's gone. So try to make sure it keeps moving through the sander when you're pushing it through. Okay, we're going to cut the top to size. That was 15 1/8. So I'm going to cut a little bit off of one side, get this edge nice and straight. You can see it's not nice and straight. It's kind of jagged and uneven. And then we're going to come, flip it over, and cut the rest off the other side. We're going to make sure we have a nice tight fit along the back fence. If you don't have a fit along the fence or a nice tight edge, then we're going to flip it over and try the other side and see which side looks more straight. So we'll start with one side. We will cut it off, and then we're going to flip it over and cut the other side. So we're going to cut this top to size. We're cutting it to 15 inches. And I'm going to do that at the sliding table saw as well, even though we're cutting with the grain. This chunk of wood is about square, and so it's going to be a little easier for us to keep it tight against the fence and so on. So I'm going to pick one edge and keep it tight against the fence. I'm going to cut a little off and get that squared up, and I'm going to flip it over and then cut the other side. Then everything should be square when we're done. All right, now that we've got our door and our top cut to size, what we're going to do is put the same rounded profile that we have on the drawer front. We're going to have the top, the drawer front, and the door all match so that they are uniform. And so we're going to go back to the router table and get that set up. All right, back here at the router table again, we want to make sure that this is set up the same way as it was before if you aren't running these all at the same time. And again, we're looking for the bottom of this radius, the bottom of the slope, to be just below the workpiece. So if we bring our workpiece up, we should be just below that as we cut. We're set up still, so we're going to go ahead and run this. Again, if you come up to a machine and you did not set this up, you want to verify the settings. Don't assume that it's set up for what you need. Now we're going to look at our pieces and determine which one is our best side. This one's got a little bit of a dark streak right here. Okay, this one looks maybe a little bit more uniform, but a little not. It's personal preference on this. There's not really going to be a good side or a bad side, except for what you want it to look like when you're done. I think we're going to leave that knot facing out, so that's going to be down. And again, on this side, we're looking for a nice uniform grain, trying to make it look like the piece was one piece when we're done. I think this side is a little bit more uniform than the other side. So good side goes down when we router, and remember, we're going to do the end grain first. So when we talk about routering the end grain first, you can see right here on the profile, it chipped out. Now, hopefully when we come back and router with the grain, it will clean up these chips and we won't be left with a defect in our wood. So that is why we want to do the end grain first, to avoid any chips. You can see we get a little bit of chips on both sides, and so to prevent that, we are doing the end grain first. All right, we're going to take the orbital sander. We're going to sand both sides of the door and the top. We're going to not only sand them, but we're going to sand the radius we just put on. And on the back side, we're going to lightly break the edges so they're not sharp. Otherwise, we're left with a nice sharp edge that isn't as appealing to touch as something that's maybe a little bit smoother. So we're going to sand the edges, the faces, and break the edges. Just like prior sanding, we're going to sand the top couple inches of the project, because once the top comes on, we're going to have inside corners that are difficult to sand. So I'm going to sand up top, make sure everything's nice and flush, sand the top couple inches all the way around the project so that our top doesn't interfere with sanding later on. Now we can install the top. All right, the first thing we're going to do is take our countersink bit again. We're going to pre-drill 2 to 3 holes in each cleat so that we can attach the top. So I'm going to take my drill and get that loaded. And I'm going to get my drill in there and pre-drill some holes. Hang it off the table so you don't hit the table with the drill bit. Countersink them so that the screw heads are below the surface. And do it to the back side. Now we're going to take our solid top and we're going to put it on the table. I'm going to protect it from the table just like I did with the plywood. We've already spent time sanding it up. So I'm going to take that and put it down on my protecting pads. Now I'm going to take my cabinet, make sure there's no burrs from those screw holes coming out, and I'm going to turn that upside down, and we should be flush in the back. So if I take my cabinet and line it up right against the back edge, okay, that should be a start for us. And we should be 1.5 inches in. So I'm going to take my tape measure and get that close. It's going to take some fine tweaking here. If you're not at 1.5 inches, try to make sure that the top is centered at least. And then we're going to come around here and we're going to check this way. And one thing I can see right now is we should only have 1.5 inches in the front. So we're going to need to cut this off. We went a little too big on this. Cut this off, rerouter it and sand it. And then we'll come back for the installation. All right, now that we got our top cut down to its correct size, we're going to put the cabinet on top, and we're going to take some time and get this to an even overhang all the way around. I'm going to clamp down the top so that it doesn't move while we're putting screws in. It doesn't lift up or anything like that. All right, there's our cabinet put together. We'll put the door and drawer back in. And slide that a few times, and it will get back on track. And we'll take our door and clip it back on. So the only thing left that we're going to do is we're going to make some corner trim for the cabinet. The corner trim is going to wrap the front edge and cover up any imperfections we have along where the face frame meets the cabinet. Sometimes there might be glue spots, there might be chips in the veneer. There might be a bump from where the router moved on you when you were routering the edge. So we're going to make some corner trim that will wrap this and give it a nice finished look.